The morning the Briarhand gang rode a slow circle around Drywater Crossing, Sheriff Tamsin Wilder stood on the boardwalk and studied the town she was supposed to keep unbroken. The wind carried the smell of wet creosote from the rail yard, and far out past the freight sheds a dust devil unstitched the horizon, loose and harmless as a child's kite. Tamsin held her hat brim against the breeze and let the quiet settle in her ribs the way a river settles in its banks. She liked the quiet. She had learned to live inside it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. Behind her, old Ezra Tompkins pretended to rearrange horseshoes on their peg outside the smithy, but his eyes flicked toward the road where three riders stood their mounts at a patient slant, laughing among themselves. Their laughter wasn't joy, it was the kind that tested fences, measuring what would hold and what would snap. Tamsin held her hat brim against the breeze and let the quiet settle in her ribs the way a river settles in its banks. She liked the quiet. She had learned to live inside it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. Behind her, old Ezra Tompkins pretended to rearrange horseshoes on their peg outside the smithy, but his eyes flicked toward the road where three riders stood their mounts at a patient slant, laughing among themselves. Their laughter wasn't joy, it was the kind that tested fences, measuring what would hold and what would snap. Tamsin smoothed the thumb along the star at her breastbone, felt the heat of the metal through her shirt, and forced the air in and out slow. They only came with three at first, advanced teeth of the bite to follow. Long coats, dust-grimed faces, all of them young enough to think they were immortal and mean enough to try to prove it. The one in the middle had a hat feather the color of burned wheat and a smile that tried to own the street. He reined closer until his horse's breath dampened the salt-white boards of the sheriff's office porch. "Well now," he said, looking Tamsin up and down, as if she were a new tool he'd not yet decided to purchase. "A quiet sheriff. Ain't that pretty?" He tilted his head, fain squinting at her badge. "Tamsin Wilder. Uncommon sort of name." "It does the job," she said. He laughed, showing fine teeth. "Job like yours needs more than a name, needs grit, a voice loud enough to be heard when the thunder starts. You got one of those?" "I've got enough." It was true. She had enough voice, enough grit, enough patience to stand solid under mockery and not give the men the satisfaction of seeing what they wanted to stir. Enough to keep her hands still at her sides while the middle boy's eyes hopped to the revolver worn low at her hip, to the set of her shoulders, to the place where her shadow fell at her boots. "Tell your boss," she said, "that Drywater Crossing is not in the market for trouble or spectacle. I don't have the jail space, and I'm not opening a new row of graves." "Boss!" The boy's smile stretched thin, like rawhide pulled too tight. "That what you think Ash Briar is? A boss? You'll get to call him something, Sheriff, but it won't be sir." His gaze swept the storefronts, finding the curtains that trembled when housewives and storekeepers eased aside to watch. "We'll be back when the sun changes her mind. You think on what you want to say when the rest of us arrive." He tipped the burned wheat feather like a salute and wheeled his horse. His companion's spurs rang like laughter on the boards as they went. Tamsin didn't move until their dust cleared, and even then she only turned enough to catch Ezra's eyes. "No talk," she said softly. He nodded, throat working. "No talk." Inside the office, the air was cooler, the shade cut by long slats of window light. The map on the wall still bore the knife scar from the last time a man had insisted the county line ought to bend around his property. Tamsin set her hat on the peg, wrote a few lines in the logbook, time, weather, three riders seen, and let the stillness return. Quiet had been a choice once. These days it felt more like a vow. Milo Park, the telegraph boy, scuffed in with his cap sideways and a message envelope bent so many times it was soft as cloth. "From the junction, Sheriff," he said, voice too loud in the hush. "Rail Watch says a dozen riders camped at Deadwater Wash last night. They were talking about dry water, talking about the stage too, the bank's bullion shipment, the late run because of the washed-out trestle." "I know," Tamsin said. "Thank you, Milo." She folded the message and slid it beneath the paperweight that had once been a polished river stone. Her palm stayed on the stone a heartbeat longer than necessary. "Head home by the livery. Stay off the main street." He hesitated. "You gonna call for help from Blue Mesa?" Too far, too slow. She didn't add that she had already written that wire twice and never sent it, words stuck just behind her teeth. "Go on." When he left, the door's latch clicked like the last tick of a winding spring. Tamsin breathed, counted the weight of the room, the desk, the cot, the safe with its lead belly, the rifle above the door, each thing in its place, and listened for the familiar thing beneath all sound, the narrow, steady river of her pulse. When it stayed measured, when it stayed smooth, she allowed her shoulders to soften. The quiet held. It held until afternoon when the sky went high and white and the heat shook above the street. That's when Ash Breyer arrived with the rest of his boys, 9 now by Tamsin's count, with saddlebags heavy enough to thump a horse's ribs and eyes lit with the kind of brightness that comes from the idea of owning what never belonged to you. They didn't bother to mask their faces. Men like that rarely did. Masks were for those who might want to change their minds later. These were boys trying to turn themselves into their own stories. They tied their horses directly to the hitch outside the bank, as if the town was already theirs, then spread along the boardwalk with a languid arrogance that made every storefront door look narrower, every window smaller, every breath in dry water turned shallow. Ash stepped into the street. His boots were good leather, newly stitched, as if he wanted the dust to admire him when it clung. The burned wheat feathers showed again above his left ear, a habit then, not a whim. And his hands hung light and easy, not quite near his guns, not quite away. He grinned as if he had been born doing it. "I hope you made your mind up, Sheriff, because the sun changed hers." Tamsin stepped off the office porch and into the street's center as if the ground had remembered her weight and was glad for it. She wanted the distance right. Nothing behind her worth shooting through, nothing in front but space for words.
"The stage is late," she said. "Rain took the east trestle and the midnight driver makes up time by cutting the wash. You know all that. Which means you also know there's no reason to loiter with guns out where decent folk can see them. You want a drink? You can have it without a show. You want to move on? That's better." Ash's smile tilted. "You want to go back inside and pretend we're a postcard?" He spread his hands, turning in a slow half-circle to address the windows and the doorways. "Hear this, Drywater. Your sheriff's voice is soft. She wants to whisper us away." He clucked his tongue, and the men behind him laughed, the hard kind, meant to bruise. "I want to see if she's got bones under that quiet." The first test was small. A boy from the feed store, no older than Milo, stumbled out with an armload of sack twine and froze mid-step, eyes gone wide. One of Ash's men made a bird call, sharp and cruel, and flicked his cigarette to knock the twine from the boy's hands. The bundles thumped and spilled. Another man nudged the boy's ankle with a boot heel just hard enough to sting. Tamsin's chest tightened. The air turned thin, high country thin, where every breath must be chosen. She realized her hands had found each other behind her back, one thumb rubbing the other knuckle as if that bone might answer a question. She stopped the movement, let her arms rest loose again at her sides. "Leave the boy," she said. "Make me," the man with the bird call said, delighted. Tamsin didn't step closer. She didn't raise her voice. The years had taught her that volume wasted itself fast. If he goes home safe now, and if nobody else leaves the boardwalk, if no one gets clever, then you and I can have a conversation later, Ash. Something you want more than this, I expect. The grin cooled around Ash Breyer's eyes. What's that? A way out with your skin still yours. Laughter again, but it faltered at the edges the way a campfire falters when a wind shifts. The bird-voice man scooped the fallen twine with a flourish and shoved it at the boy hard enough to stagger him backward. "Run, chicken! Run, tell your mama she raised you soft!" The boy ran. Tamsin let the breath leave her slow. The men prowled the edges of her patience, looking for the tender place to press. They found it when Milo himself came around the corner, wrong side of the street, cap still crimped from where his hand had wrung it while he waited at the wire. He saw the men and stopped so fast dust climbed his shins, then darted toward Tamsin like a colt half deciding which fence was safest. "Back," Tamsin said without looking at him. "Back to the alley." But youth underestimates distance and the speed of cruelty. A lariat hissed as it cut the air. The loop fell lazy as a summer halo and cinched tight around Milo's chest. He yelped and went down, arms pinned. The man at the other end of the rope planted a boot and hauled, laughing as the boy skidded across the street's packed clay. Tamsin's chest tightened. The air turned thin, high country thin, where every breath must be chosen. She realized her hands had found each other behind her back, one thumb rubbing the other knuckle as if that bone might answer a question. She stopped the movement, let her arms rest loose again at her sides. "Leave the boy," she said. "Don't what?" Ash asked brightly. "Don't play?" The man with the rope hauled again, drawing Milo into a graceless sprawl at his boots. He tapped the loop with the toe of his boot. "Bird got snared." Ash looked back at Tamsin, eyes bright as brilliantine coal. "Say please," he suggested. "How about that, Sheriff? You say please, we let the chick go." She could feel every witness in Drywater holding a breath that did not belong to them. She could feel the weight of the star on her chest and the heavier private weight beneath her ribs where a different sign had slept for years, a sign only a few old ghosts could read. "Quiet is not surrender," she told the drumbeat in her chest. "Quiet is a tool." "Please," Tamsin said. The laughter that answered was uglier. Ash cocked his head, clearly savoring it. "Now say Ash Breyer is a handsome prince and I'm a little broom who needs sweeping." He said it like a joke, but his gaze was hungry for the bend of her spine. Some men need a woman to kneel before they can stand upright in their own bones. "No," Tamsin said. Ash's mouth went flat. He nodded once to the man with the rope, a small flick easy to miss if you were looking anywhere but his hands. Tamsin had learned to watch hands. The rope man grinned and dug his boot heel into Milo's ribs. The boy gagged around a breath. "I said please," Tamsin told Ash. "And I said you didn't say it right." He pulled his cuff straight, as if the town's dirt had offended him. "You want to trade? We like trades. Say the words I want, or put that star on the boards and slide your gun over to me. We'll see how much you care about little messengers then." Tamsin could feel Drywater's eyes burning holes in the air. She could hear Ezra whisper an oath, even though he had promised no talk. She could taste the grit of the street and the salt of her own refusal, and beneath all of it a deeper taste, older, a metal brightness she had tried to forget. She had promised a grave with a wooden marker and a name she almost never spoke, that she would not go back to the way the world once flinched when she breathed. "Let him go," she said, "and I'll take off the star. We'll talk after that, you and me." "Gun first," Ash said. "You throw that iron, and maybe you'll be good for conversation." She looked at Milo and found his eyes. He was shaking, but he had enough steadiness to give her what she needed, a nod, quick and jerky. He would run when the rope loosened, or he would try.
"On 3, Tamsin said to Ash. You ease the rope. I slide the gun. Ash raised 2 fingers as if to swear on an oath the sky hadn't asked for. 1, he said. His man shifted his boot from Milo's ribs to the knot. 2. Tamsin slid her palm along the worn throat of her revolver, feeling every mile it had traveled to get here, and every mile she had held it quiet. 3. She let the gun cross the dust in a smooth, short scrape. The rope eased. For 2 heartbeats, everything was true. Then the rope man laughed and jerked hard, dragging Milo forward again, faster this time, his cap tearing free and skittering away like a frightened beetle. "Oops," the man said. "Seems my hand slipped." Ash smiled at Tamsin the way a man smiles when he has chosen exactly what kind of man he is. "You shouldn't have said please," he said. "We like the other word better." He stooped without breaking her gaze, scooped her revolver in a casual, possessive movement, and weighed it in his hand. Nice balance. Light. Quick. He spun it with the practiced negligence of boys who ruin things they've never had to pay for. The laughter that followed swelled, and something in Tamsin's chest went cold and clear. If quiet is a river, then even rivers decide sometimes to cut new banks. "Let the boy go," she said, but this time her voice had the tone of a bell struck. Heads turned as if the air itself had snapped to attention. Ash's grin thinned. "You just gave me your teeth," he said. "I got no reason to bargain with gums." Tamsin stepped forward 1 pace. Ash's men lifted hands to their belts. She stopped, giving them the courtesy of a stillness to consider. "I don't bargain with liars," she said. "I warned them once. This is once." "Or what?" the rope man asked cheerily. "You'll ride a stern note?" He jerked the rope again for punctuation. Behind Tamsin, a door eased open. She didn't turn, but she knew the shape by the sound. She knew the smell of soap and lamp oil and hair ribbon. Letha Joe from the mercantile stood with a rifle braced to her shoulder, thin as a willow, jaw set. "No," Tamsin said without looking. "Back inside." "You need?" "Back." She didn't put heat in the word, only weight. After a heartbeat, Letha Joe retreated and the latch caught like a relieved breath. Ash chuckled. "Well now, you do have a voice. Shame you don't have your gun." He weighed her revolver again and watched the way the leather of her empty holster lay against her hip, molded by years. His gaze snagged there, and something like curiosity troubled the water of his delight. "Where'd you learn to wear it like that?" he asked, light as if he were asking where he bought flour. "Same place you learned to lie." Tamsin said, "Hand the boy over." "Second warning," he teased. "Last," she said. Silence draped itself over the boardwalks. The wind stilled as if it too were listening. Tamsin could feel the town tilt toward whatever would come next, the way a glass tilts toward a thirsty mouth. Ash's eyes flicked to the faces in the windows and came back to her. He didn't like the quiet anymore. It wasn't his. He snapped his fingers. The rope man planted his boot again, harder this time. Milo made a sound Tamsin wouldn't let herself name. "Kill the quiet," Ash said, but the order was shaky around the edges. "Make some noise." Tamsin moved. There are motions a body teaches itself, and there are motions a body learns. The trick is remembering which is which, and whether you can afford the price of remembering. Tamsin's right hand went to the flat seam at the back of her belt, where leather looked like leather and was not. Her fingers found the seam's false tongue and tore it loose. The little hideaway gave up what it had kept. For the years Tamsin had been trying to be a different sort of person. A narrow, kept clean derringer with a barrel the length of a man's last excuse. Ash's grin evaporated. "Well now," he said softly, and the men around him stopped smiling too, because they had just seen something they did not expect. Not panic, not pleading, but an economy of motion that belonged to another life. "What's a broom doing with an extra bristle?" he asked, but no one laughed. Tamsin did not raise the tiny gun above her hip. She did not blink.
She did not let the old name climb her throat, not even inside her own skull. Ash angled Tamsin's revolver toward her, narrowing her stance a degree that would mean everything once the sky broke open. "Easy," he said. "Don't be stupid." "Let the boy go," she said again, "or I make you choose which hand you want to eat with for the rest of your life." Something in Ash's face flinched. "Not much, enough." He said, "You don't want to do this," but his eyes weren't on her face anymore. They were on her hands, measuring, and then lower on the small thing she held steady as if it weighed 100 pounds. There was a scar on her right thumb from a night nobody in Drywater knew about, a thin white crescent that caught the hard noon light. Ash's gaze snagged on it. He inhaled through his teeth like a man touching a hot stove. "Ah," he said, "now that's interesting." His voice changed, and the men heard it and straightened, like dogs who've scented something that isn't rabbit. "Boys, you ever hear a song about a larkspur that blooms at dusk?" No one breathed. Tamsin didn't move, didn't blink. The quiet inside her grew so complete she could count the grains of grit under her boot heel. Ash's smile crept back, slow and reverent, as if he were kneeling at an altar he didn't know he believed in until now. "I did," he whispered. "I heard that song down in Bisbee, where a man swore he saw petals move faster than lightning. I heard it again in Tucson from a woman who said she watched a ghost sow daylight through a man's gun hand. I thought they were stories." He tipped his chin at her empty holster and at the way the leather had been taught to lie. "Till just now."
"Let the boy go," Tamsin said, because names have weight, and she would not give him the one he wanted. Ash Breyer's eyes shone. "Say it for me. Say you're her. Let him go." The rope loosened a fraction, not by kindness, by calculation. Ash wanted to see what she would do when there was a heartbeat's worth of room. "Boys," Ash breathed, almost tender, "meet the Larkspur Ghost." The name landed on the street like a shadow of a hawk. Tamsin did not flinch. She kept the center of her body where it belonged, in the quiet, and waited for the thing that would always come next once that name was spoken in the open: the hunger. The men stared with the kind of awe that curdles into bravery at the corners. It would tip, Tamsin knew. Awe tilts into a dare, and dare into a draw. "Take your hands off the boy," she said. "All of you step back to the boards. Ash, put my colt on the ground." He tilted his head, as if listening to a sound none of them could hear. He looked as young as he really was, just for a heartbeat, a boy wearing a man's laugh. Then he smiled again, slowly, with prayerful cruelty, and cocked the hammer of her own revolver with his thumb. "No," he said. "I came to see a legend. It'll be a sin to leave before church." Time narrowed to a doorway only one person at a time could fit through. Tamsin could feel the town behind her leaning, and she made herself a wall. She could feel the old signature waking in her bones, the one that knew the shape of a second, the way a jeweler knows the weight of gold by touch. "Last chance," she said, and for the first time there was steel under the bell. It was not a warning. It was a sentence. Ash Breyer smiled, so wide now it looked like a wound, and flicked his wrist. The street discovered how long a heartbeat could be. Tamsin's world learned it with her. The Derringer's Youth found Ash's right hand and the vein that made his thumb strong. The rope jerked again as the man who held it decided too late to be brave. Milo found his knees, a gasp tearing his throat. A curtain snapped aside 2 doors down. Letha Joe's face flared white, then slammed back into shadow. Somewhere a horse blew through its nose as if trying to snort the smell of fear off the air. Ash's thumb pressed. Metal clicked. The Colt's hammer began to fall.
and the hammer fell. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The hammer fell. It fell like a door slamming in a corridor of seconds, a hard, bright click that meant the world had chosen. Ashbrier's thumb pinned the spur, Tamsin's derringer breathed once, and the air between them turned to splinters of heat and grit. The tiny pistol bucked in her palm with a tidy, vicious pop. No roar, no bravado, just work done. Ash's smile shattered. The derringer's slug tore the web of his gun hand, cut a seam through tendons that translated will to trigger, and broke the geometry of his grip. His own borrowed shot went off, but that shot became a question mark. The Colt's barrel kicked wild as pain ran a hot wire up his arm, and the bullet went screaming past Tamsin's ear to punch a silver hole through the varnished sign of Granger's Mercantile. Letha Joe flinched behind the door. The window glass hummed like something alive. Tamsin was already moving. She stepped into the rope, pivoted, and put her heel down on the knot hard enough to crush it flat. The rope man swore and lost his rhythm. She didn't look. Looking is a tax you pay when you can't afford it. Her offhand snapped down and tore the derringer's second barrel loose from its patient silence. She put that round into Rawhide, not to kill, but to take the leg's argument away. And the rope man's knee unthreaded under him. He went down shouting as Milo kicked backward like a jackrabbit and rolled free. "Run," Tamsin said. Not loud, not looking. Milo ran. His cap lay in the dust like a dropped petal. Tamsin felt a single strand of hair along her cheek move in the heat of his passing. The town, which had been holding the same breath for too long, gasped as one. And then too many things tried to happen at once. Ash yelled. His boys moved. Ezra exhaled something that had waited behind his teeth for 20 years. The street leaned toward violence, and Tamsin leaned harder toward precision. She tossed the empty derringer toward the porch, let it clatter a warning out of reach, and raised both hands a fraction to show nothing else was coming out of hidden seams. Her eyes never left Ash. He had dropped the Colt. It lay between them, half-cocked like a snake deciding whether to die. Blood stripe painted his fingers, and he held his hand as if it were a stranger who had said something unforgivable. "Pick it up," she said to him, slow. A dozen fragments of sense moved across his face. He smiled, because that's where he lived, but the shape was wrong now. All edges. "You shot me," he said, wonder softening the edges for a heartbeat. "I warned you twice." He huffed a laugh. "Boys?" Two of them inched for angles along the boardwalk. Tamsin lifted one finger without looking. "No," she said to the street. "Everyone keep their places. If a gun leaves leather, I make a choice you won't like." She breathed once, let the words come out steady as a plumb line. "Ash, kneel and push my Colt toward me with your boot. You can keep breathing while you do it." He did not kneel. Pride will let a man bleed for it. But he hooked the gun with his toe and scraped it along the dust until the muzzle bumped her boot. She didn't bend. She didn't need it yet. She let the town see that, let the boys understand that the iron wasn't what made her dangerous. "Let's move this out of the street. You've had your show." Ash flexed his ruined hand. Red drops made a rash in the dust, and he murmured, "I came for a legend. Looks like she came for me." He tipped his head, a new respect darkening his eyes. "Larkspur." She did not give him the satisfaction of an answer. From the telegraph window, Milo's voice cracked. "Sheriff, line from the east. Stage driver says he's 4 miles out and he's not stopping. The wash is rising behind and he's got the bullion strongbox chained to the coach." Ash's head turned a fraction. It was the barest glance, a man thinking about 2 prizes at once. It told Tamsin what she needed to know. He wasn't done. He was recalculating. The bank, the stage, the story he wanted to take out of dry water and wear like a coat. Inside, Tamsin said. Bank and boardwalk clear. Ezra, pull shutters. Letha Joe, bolt your door. Everyone else home. She stepped back toward her office, still never letting Ash out of her center of sight. Ash, you and I are going to talk where the sun doesn't have to squint. You going to heal me with your eyes? He said lightly, but there was a tremor in it. He wriggled his fingers as if trying to argue them back to obedience. You ruined my painting hand. If your art is hurting people, then yes. He laughed again, more softly this time, genuine in spite of himself. Oh, Sheriff, we're going to have us a day. They backed toward her office door together, a slow dance that kept the world arranged. The town obeyed her voice. Doors pulled shut, shutters snecked shut. The street emptied by degrees until it was only heat haze, horses, 24 watching cracks, and the 9 boys who wanted a story to carry. The rope man groaned in the dust, leg gone to jelly. No one bent for him. Inside, Tamsin told Ash again.
In a moment, he tipped his chin toward her gun. You keep that colt down by your boot like a fishing lure, and I will be tempted to take a bite. Then don't look down, she said. He smiled and looked down anyway, defiance to the bone. She placed the sole of her boot on the colt's barrel and drew it to her like a foot draws a chalk line. She didn't pick it up. The quiet wanted that. She let the quiet have it. In the office, the air cooled to the edges of the day. Ezra ghosted in behind them without being told. He took the rifle from over the door and sat with the comfort of a man who had married a tool. The office smelled faintly of coffee and oil and the riverstone that held down Tamsin's paper. She nodded to the corner cot. Sit. Ash sat as if he had chosen the idea first. He pressed his shredded hand to his shirt and hissed. The fabric darkened. Tamsin set a basin on the desk and poured water from the can. You clean that. You get to keep fingers. He watched her over the lip of the basin, eyes bright and considering. And if I decide I like 9-1 better than whatever this is, then you'll try the door, Tamsin said, and you'll learn how quickly I can put you asleep without killing you. He laughed again, winced, and put his hand in the water. It pinked, then red. You talk soft, but you set the table like a judge. You always like this? Only when someone drags a boy by a rope. He considered that and found the edges of his smile again. Then I've done you a favor. I gave you a reason to be what you are. What I am is a sheriff who prefers a quiet town. She tore a strip from the hem of a spare shirt with swift, neat motions. This will hurt. Everything worth learning does. Ezra cleared his throat for the first time in 10 minutes. Milo says the line went dead behind the stage. Wash ate the poles. Drivers bringing it hot through Miller's cut. If the gang means to crack the strongbox, they'll try to wedge the coach on the angle and pry it. Or they'll hold the town hostage to stop the driver cold. Smart blacksmith. Old enough to remember when boys like you still asked permission to sit at a saloon table. Tamsin wrapped Ash's hand. He flinched exactly once. You get one more choice, she said, binding the cloth with a knot he'd need his teeth to undo. You call your men off the stage. You take your hurt pride and your worse hand and you ride. Or you make Drywater the place that teaches you something about yourself that you won't like. He tilted his head, and for a breath his grin cracked to show what lived under it. A boy trying to own a story big enough to hold his fear. You really are her, he said softly. I thought the larkspur was smoke. Tamsin didn't answer. She glanced at Ezra. Get me the spare holster. Ezra did, and she buckled it on without looking down. Her hands knew the straps the way a church bell knows the rope. Ash watched like a man memorizing a confession. You could have killed me, he said. I still can, she said, and turned to the door. The stage came in like a hunted animal. Lather on bays, axles crying, driver hunched as if to make himself a smaller target for the bullets he expected from everywhere. Dust lived inside the coach's windows as if it had been born there. The strongbox was indeed chained, iron linking iron, a practical answer to a question men with guns like to ask. Tamsin met the coach at the west mouth of the street with her palm up. The driver saw her, and the wild in his face tightened into something that listened. He hauled the team down hard enough to carve 2 pale furrows into the hard-packed clay and swore in relief when they held. "Crossin'? You got a town of ghosts or a town of angels?" "We've got a town of people who'd like to keep being people," Tamsin said. "Off the box, slow. Keep your brakes set." He glanced past her and saw the 9 boys arranged like a bad idea along the boardwalk. He swallowed. "I ain't paid for a war." "No," Tamsin said. "You're paid to carry passengers and freight. I'm paid to keep the war from deciding it lives here." Ash drifted from the office door to his market bank steps like smoke learning a shape. His men lifted their hands from idle to interested. Tamsin did not raise her voice. "No one touches that iron," she said to the street. "We don't belong to it, and it doesn't belong to us." The driver slid down. He was gray with road and worry. "Ma'am," he said to Tamsin, "if you can get me 2 minutes and a crowbar, I can unship that box without rattling the bank's teeth. If you can get me 10, I can rechain it under the coach bench and be gone." "You get 5. Ezra." "On it." The old smith trotted like a younger version of himself, crowbar already in his hand, curses riding shotgun. He had the look of a man who had helped birth too many wagons and the look of a man who had buried some. Ash lifted his good hand a fraction. "Boys!" "Don't," Tamsin said, and everyone heard the word differently this time. Not a plea, not a law, a promise with a lid on it. He lowered his hand. For now. The crowbar bit. The chain clanged. The driver worked with brisk terror as if speed could bargain with fate. Ezra muttered, "Left! Now twist! No, your other left! There!" And metal gave way with a sigh so satisfying it almost sounded human. The strong box dropped to the boards with a meaty thunk that said there was weight inside and that the wood under it would remember the moment. Ash looked at the box the way a thirsty man looks at a well on someone else's land. "Sheriff," he said, "how's this gonna go?" "You ride. We send the coach on, the bank takes its tally, the town sleeps tonight." "And if we don't like that play," one of his men asked, "then you find out how many bones live in your hands." She didn't look at him. She watched Ash, because he was the hinge. She watched his eyes, and the way his ruined grip made the angles of his shoulders change. She watched the corner of his mouth that learned to lie before he learned to read. She watched and waited. He winked. "We're gonna want a trophy. It ain't good storytelling if we leave with nothing." "You leave with yourself. That's a prize you'll miss more than you know if you gamble it." The strong box rose, levered on the bar. Ezra and the driver staggered together to the coach. The driver shoved it into the bench cage with a grunt that sounded like prayer. "Latch. Pin. Tie. Good. Go." The driver scrambled for the box. "You buying me 5 seconds more?" he asked, foot in the iron. Tamsin nodded once. He threw the brake. The team lunged, the coach tore a new breath into the street, and became distance. Ash sighed as if someone had pocketed the punchline. "Well, then it's the bank." "You rob it, you'll have to carry the weight through my town," Tamsin said. "You'll have to walk your horses slow with the sun on your neck and the windows watching you. You can do that if there's something wrong with you. Is there?" He looked at his blood-wet wrap and then at the shadow her hat brim made on her cheek. "Maybe," he said, "maybe the wrong thing is I like the way the name tastes." "The name?" He smiled. "Larkspur." Her skin tightened in the soft places. She let the feeling pass through and out.
You like the taste of poison, Ash. That's the kind of man who dies young and calls it romance. Or dies old and calls it history. He lifted his shoulders. Either way, someone sings. He snapped his fingers. Boys? 3 of them moved. Not fast, not clever, just the boldness of the young. Tamsin's Colt came off the dust like a fish off water and found her hand by reflex. The hammer said yes. She didn't shoot to kill. She shot to shut doors, a heel, a gun hand, a shoulder. 3 shots. 3 new versions of the future. Men on the boards surprised to learn how much their bodies required certain parts to live the stories they wanted. Ezra's rifle made a single sound like a wooden beam deciding not to break. A 4th boy's hat turned into something the wind took. He sat down hard and remembered his mother's voice for the first time in a year. Enough, Tamsin said, and the street flinched at the note in it, the sound metal makes when it knows it could be softer and chooses not to be. Ash had gone very still. Quiet looked different on him. It fit wrong and rubbed his edges raw. "You're gonna run out of mercy," he murmured. "Then what?" "Then I pick smaller things to aim at," she said. He laughed in spite of himself. And for a heartbeat they were simply 2 people in a hot town making sentences, because hands weren't making worse things. That was when the rider came in from the south. Alone. Black coat long enough to whisper to the horse's flanks, hat brim pulled low, the kind of stillness about him that does not belong to tired men or careful ones. Stillness like cool water. Stillness like grave dirt. A ripple moved through Ash's boys as if a wind had walked through their shirts. Tamsin felt it too. The shift. The way the street's temperature changed. How even the sun seemed to lean to see better. "Who's that?" Milo breathed from the window. Ezra didn't turn his head. "Nobody you want to meet if you're planning to wake tomorrow." The rider stepped down at the edge of the boards and tied his horse with a thrift of motion that would have made Tamsin nod in any other life. His boots found the street like he remembered it. He lifted his chin enough to push the shadow off his face, and the town said his name for him without moving their mouths. Jericho Vale. It was not so much a name as the sound a church floor makes when it knows caskets have been carried there. Tamsin knew it the way a hawk knows the weather. 100 lies had been told about him, and none of them made him smaller. Ash Briar smiled with his whole face for the first time that day. It made him look exactly as young as he was. "Well now, saints and sermons. The West sent me its most feared gunslinger after all." Jericho looked at the street as if he had walked into a room he remembered from a dream, and everything was where he had left it. His eyes touched Ash, flicked over the men, and came to rest on Tamsin. He did not smile, he did not frown, he only looked, and that was enough to make the air step backward around him. "Afternoon," he said, to no one, in a voice that sounded like gravel learning manners. No one answered. Sound had decided not to be foolish. Jericho's gaze took in Ash's blood-wet bandage, the downed men, the intact strongbox receding as a dust wake, the town with its shutters cracked like cautious eyelids. Then he looked at Tamsin's hands and stayed there, at the way the Colt lay easy, at the way her fingers had not whitened on it, though everything else in the street had. He tipped his head. "Sheriff." "Vale." She did not ask what brought him. Men like Jericho never say. They arrive where gravity tells them to arrive. Ash laughed delighted. "You 2 acquainted? Don't say, don't ruin it. I want to hear it sung." Jericho didn't look at him. "You've got 8 men who think they're 9. You've got dust on your teeth and a sermon in your ears. You should leave before the sermon ends." Ash's eyes sparked. "I should leave after I shake the legend's hand. Which one of you is it, the quiet sheriff, or the man the desert uses to keep its stories clean?" Jericho gave a small, real smile then, the kind that is all edges and no teeth.
She's why you're still standing. He nodded at Tamsin, without taking his eyes off her. And I'm why you think you want to test that. Tamsin did not look away. Her pulse steadied the way it always did when a storm hit the ridge. She had seen Jericho Vale once, years ago, half a territory north, a silhouette in a doorway between her and a kind of mistake. He had not spoken then. He had only watched until the mistake decided it wanted to live. She had walked away and taught herself quiet after that. She had not planned ever to share a street with him again. What brings you, Vale? The scent of someone else's trouble? The line from Bisbee, a song about flowers blooming at dusk. I thought I'd see if the ground here grows such things. His eyes softened by a handful of stones. Tamsin Wilder. He said her name like a thing he had weighed before and found equal. Ash blinked. A small mean joy lit him. You know the sheriff's name. I like this sermon. He flapped his bandaged hand. I'll make a pew for you out of the bank counter. Jericho's gaze slid to him finally. You'll make a grave out of your mother's patience, he said, not unkind, and not as an insult, as an inventory. The boy flushed like a rash. Vale, Tamsin said, this town is mine while the sun is up. The bank stays closed to idiots. The stage runs free. These men ride away with all the fingers they came with if they go now. You can help by being somewhere else. He nodded once, almost approval. And if they don't go? Then I empty out the parts of them I can live with, she said. He looked at her as if she had handed him a map he had drawn for himself years before. All right, he said. I'll stand where the wind doesn't confuse your bullet. He stepped to the left as if honoring an angle only he and she could see. Ash swallowed greed in a gulp. I am going to be legend by supper, he said, giddy. The Larkspur Ghost and Jericho Vale in one street? When do men get chances like this? Right before they stop being men, Ezra said. He levered a shell into the Henry with a sigh. Sheriff? Hold, she said. She felt the geometry of the street slot into place inside her ribs. The distances, the heights, the places where a ricochet might run if it decided to skip. She measured the way Jericho breathed, the way Ash's shadow leaned, the readiness in the boy's eyes that thought it was courage. She gave the town one breath to change its mind. It didn't.
Ash, she said, if I have to write an account of today, I will want to put in it that I said a third warning. This is it. Ride. He licked his lips. He didn't look at his men. He looked at Jericho Vale and saw a door he wanted to kick open. I think I'll stay, he said. Jericho sighed. It sounded like winter deciding it was done. Then this is a small day, he murmured. Ash's men fanned, careless, hungry. Jericho didn't reach for his gun. He reached for his hat brim and pushed it up like a man stepping into a photograph. Thompson let her breath fall until it found the deepest rung of the ladder and held it there. The first man drew on Ezra. Thompson shot his gun hand into splinters. The second went low for the bank step. Jericho's bullet flicked his boot out from under him without touching flesh. The third found himself suddenly unwilling to be the third and sat very still on the boardwalk, holding very still breaths. Ash laughed again, but it was ragged now. So this is how legends court, he said, with arithmetic. He shot at Jericho, because boys shoot at the thing they fear most. The bullet took a shaving from Jericho's coat sleeve and buried itself in the signpost by the boarding house. Jericho did not bother to answer. He did not need to. His stillness did the work. Boys, Ash said, voice breaking, if we do this, we do it all the way. That was when the bank door cracked and someone inside, someone who should have stayed still, squeaked. A clerk, pale as bread. He had wedged himself beneath the teller counter and prayed badly. The squeak had the quality of a man discovering he had not thought himself all the way through. Ash's head snapped toward the sound like a dog's. "There," he crooned, spotting an easier sermon. "There's our trophy." He lunged. Thompson moved to cut the angle. Jericho moved to cut the shadow. The two of them understood each other without deciding to. They closed the gap as if they had practiced the street all their lives. The boy with the bird whistle, the one with the cigarette earlier, saw a shape he recognized in a story and thought he could author it. He drew and fired at Thompson's back. Jericho's shot hit the bullet in the air. The sound it made was so small no one could have heard it if fear hadn't made their ears huge. A bright spark, a hiss, a puff like a candle snuffed between finger and thumb. The bird boy's mouth fell open wide enough to catch flies, and he dropped his gun because hands do that when the past splits in front of them. Ash laughed again, but it was ragged now. "So this is how legends court," he said, "with arithmetic." He shot at Jericho, because boys shoot at the thing they fear most. The bullet took a shaving from Jericho's coat sleeve and buried itself in the signpost by the boarding house. Jericho did not bother to answer. He did not need to. His stillness did the work. "Boys," Ash said, voice breaking, "if we do this, we do it all the way." That was when the bank door cracked and someone inside, someone who should have stayed still, squeaked. A clerk, pale as bread, he had wedged himself beneath the teller counter and prayed badly. The squeak had the quality of a man discovering he had not thought himself all the way through. Ash's head snapped toward the sound like a dog's. "There," he crooned, spotting an easier sermon. "There's our trophy." He lunged. Thompson moved to cut the angle. Jericho moved to cut the shadow. The two of them understood each other without deciding to. They closed the gap as if they had practiced the street all their lives. The boy with the bird whistle, the one with the cigarette earlier, saw a shape he recognized in a story and thought he could author it. He drew and fired at Thompson's back. Jericho's shot hit the bullet in the air. The sound it made was so small no one could have heard it if fear hadn't made their ears huge. A bright spark, a hiss, a puff like a candle snuffed between finger and thumb. The bird boy's mouth fell open wide enough to catch flies, and he dropped his gun because hands do that when the past splits in front of them. Ash got his fingers on the bank door and shoved it wide. The clerk yelped again. Thompson was there a half-breath later, hip to jam, shoulder to frame. "Don't," she said. "Or what?" he panted, high on it now, blood streaking his knuckles, the stories shining in his eyes. "I'll make sure you never play a card again." He considered the future without cards and flinched, but he stepped inside anyway, because momentum is a drug, and he was a priest of it. "Vale," Thompson said, without looking back. He answered without words. His footfalls went soft behind her, a man turning into architecture. Inside the bank, dust made rays of the light, and the dark wood smelled like money's patience. The clerk under the counter had his hands over his ears and his mouth open around a sound that couldn't find its way out. Ash hopped the counter, and there was a second yelp, and then a heavy thump that said somebody had learned what a floor could do. Thompson didn't go after him over the counter. She went through the gate, because gates teach men to slow down. She held the Colt low and let the quiet in the bank reach into her bones and tell her what it knew. Where the clerk's breath hid, where Ash's boots creaked, where the faint metal chime of keys had been brushed by a boy's hip a moment before. "Ash," she said, "don't make another wrong thing." "Make?" he answered, "or I collect them." A drawer jerked, metal rattled. Jericho's reflection ghosted in the black glass of a framed painting and then left it. He had taken up a post where he could see half of 3 angles without moving his head. He did not smile. He did not look away from where Thompson's shoulders told him she wanted him.
Ash popped up from behind a teller station like a jack-in-the-box and threw something. It glittered once. Thompson's hand rose and slapped it from the air without thinking. It hit the floorboards and hissed. Lie. It kissed the wood white. "You throw kitchen at me and expect to keep your teeth?" Thompson asked, almost gently. Ash giggled and threw himself across the gap for the back rooms. Thompson followed, not fast, not loud. Jericho's shadow came after like the idea of consequence. In the bank manager's office, a safe squatted in the corner with its painted roses and its promise. Ash had the combination dial under his ruined hand, and his good hand on the handle like a lover. Blood slicked metal, his fingers slid. He cursed, laughed, cursed again. "Move," Thompson said, and somewhere under his humor, a corner of him heard her and wanted to obey. He didn't. He spun the dial with the back of his knuckles, and Thompson's patience ran out of road. She stepped in close, too close for draw, and used her elbow the way a carpenter uses a mallet. It met the hinge of his jaw with a knock like a door finding home. He dropped in a sprawl that reminded her how boys sleep when they are 16 and have worked a field. Boneless, trusting the floor because they have never had the floor betray them. He groaned. The smile leaked out of him. It puddled at his cheek and took his breath with it. Jericho watched the way she stepped back, the way she covered the angles for the moment when men get back up meaner. "You don't like to bruise," he said softly. "I don't like to write the letters. Stand the door." He stood it. Outside, the street had developed a new sound. Hooves, more of them, not rattle-trot like cowhands, not freight wagons, disciplined, 4 at a time like a lesson. Thompson heard it and felt her ribs try to make a tighter cage for her heart. Ash rolled onto his back with a grin that had dirt in it now. "That'll be my second sermon," he said dreamily. "We brought friends." Jericho's eyes went to Thompson's. He did not move. She did not move. They listened together and counted with the bones of their ears. 12. "Who?" she asked Ash. "You'll like him," he said. "He likes flowers." He giggled, a little hysteria getting in the seams. "He's going to pick one." Outside, the disciplined hooves stopped. A voice carried down the street like a knife carried on a velvet tray. "Sheriff Wilder, Jericho Vale, open the bank door." Jericho's head turned a half-inch. "He knows my name," he said. Thompson breathed in. The air brought her a faint new smell, cedar smoke and oiled steel, and the sourness of a man who wears cologne to make ethics. "Who is he?" she asked, not taking her eyes off the doorway Jericho guarded. Vale's mouth tipped like he had tasted rain. They call him the Good Undertaker." Ash giggled again, delighted.
Told you he likes flowers. Tamsin had not expected Levi Kells to travel for anyone but himself. She had seen one of his funerals once, from a distance, a black cart with silver corners, and a driver who tipped his hat to widows without looking at their faces. Levi never came for crimes. He came for reputations. He collected them and varnished them and sold them back to the world at a markup. "Sheriff Wilder," came the velvet knife again, closer. "If you make me knock, I shall have to change the terms of our talk. And I've brought such polite terms." Jericho's eyes asked her a question. She answered by moving the Colt an inch in her palm. "Not yet." "Vale," Cals called, almost friendly. "From Bisbee to Yuma, they tell me you don't miss. I've set targets for you at 30 paces to keep my boys honest. Will you do me the courtesy of not shooting first?" "Depends on your boys," Jericho said, still quiet. "Ah," Kells replied, pleased. "We are in agreement. Civilized men, after all." Ash tried to sit up. Tamsin set the toe of her boot on his chest and kept him a story lower. "Breathe," she said. "I love this day," he sighed. Outside, the street rearranged itself around Levi Kells. Tamsin could feel it the way a blind horse feels a river. The sound of men aligning, the scrape of gun belts finding comfort, the tone of voices tightening up to do what they'd been practicing in their heads. "Sheriff," Kells called cheerily, "I have no quarrel with your town. I have every quarrel with the myth that walked in. You hand me ash briar and the flower you hide in your pocket, and I ride away with my reputation and leave you with yours." "The flower," Jericho said, amused. "He means you." Tamsin felt her jaw go stubborn. "He can mean my hat for all I care," she said. "He doesn't get it." Kells's voice smiled. "Of course, I do not expect your compliance merely because I ask nicely. But I like to begin with courtesy. It makes the inevitable feel less like injury." "Vale," Tamsin said quietly. "How many?" "I hear more than 12 now. I hear 2 up on the hotel balcony we didn't count. I hear a patience I don't like. I hear a wagon," Ezra called from the street in a strained whisper. "Heavy." Kells raised his voice to the coach driver pitch. "I would hate to scuff your pretty bank, Sheriff. That would be uncivil. But I have brought something that scuffs without ugliness. If you do not open your door by the time my man counts to 10, we will introduce ourselves with a hello." Jericho's eyes went to Tamsin again. She had a decision-shaped taste in her mouth. "What's the hello?" she called. "Polite dynamite," Kells said, almost apologetically. "Just enough to open a conversation." Ash beamed at the ceiling. "Oh, this keeps getting better." Tamsin bent and spoke into his ear so the street wouldn't hear it. "You're going to be dead in a week if you live to leave this office. Decide if your story ends in dry water by your choice or by someone else's." He blinked, and for the first time, the boy behind the grin tried to get a look out through his own eyes. "I don't know how," he whispered. "You start by shutting up and following a woman's lead. Hard lesson, learn fast." Outside, Kells began to count. 1. Jericho rolled his shoulders down his back like pulling on a coat you can't see. He changed nothing and became a different temperature. Tamsin felt the street lean again, and the bank groan in its beams like an old ship. 2. The clerk under the counter had stopped squeaking. He had his hands over his mouth now, as if holding in the part of him that wanted to say he would do anything if today would end. 3. "Vale," Tamsin breathed. "If they throw, I shoot the string. You take the man with the match. Left or right?" "Right." 4. "Tamsin," Ezra called from the street in a strained whisper. Not Sheriff, her name, the way a father might say it just before the river rises. "You got my anvil where you asked?" "Yes." Her voice stayed even. "Don't move it." 5. Ash swallowed. "What anvil?" "The one that makes the floor a friend," she said. "Don't talk." 6. She saw it before Kells said 7, the quick crab scuttle of a man with a bundle, the fuse already bitten and spat, the curl of it hissing like a snake in a dry bush. The bundle came low, a short hop meant to bounce through the door crack if the latch gave. Kells's men knew their work. She gave them that respect for half a thought, and then took it back. 7. Tamsin shot the string, not loud, not grand, an old butcher cutting twine. The fuse hiccuped, curled like a scolded worm, and went out. Jericho's shot did not kill the man with the match. It put fire in his pocket. He danced the way men do when a god they don't believe in chooses their trousers for prayer. The street laughed in spite of itself, and Kells's voice warmed. "Oh, Sheriff! Oh, Vale! We are going to entertain each other." 8. Something heavy thumped against the bank's outer wall. The anvil. Ezra had dragged it last night at Tamsin's quiet request when the wire from the junction spoke of 9 boys and a hunger for spectacle. It would eat force and give back complaint instead of splinters, she hoped. 9. "Vale," she said. "If they stack the hello, we greet them with goodbye."
Agreed, he said. 10. The door frame shook, not with explosion, with insult. Kells had chosen mallets first, out of a sense of manners. The hinges creaked, but did not fail. Ezra muttered something vulgar and grateful outside. Sheriff Wilder, Kells sang, the velvet now with a rasp. I do not like to repeat myself. Then don't, Tamsin called. Go home, you'll live longer. You can sell that to your customers. A beat of silence, and then Kells laughed, delighted. Oh, I will enjoy you. The laugh cut off like a cloth. Again, he snapped, and the mallet swung. Jericho's weight shifted a quarter-inch. You're going to buy yourself more than letters, he murmured. I'll buy us minutes, she said. That's the currency I keep. He nodded once, respectful. The third insult to the door cracked the outer molding, and the anvil underneath it rang like a low bell. The clerk whimpered. Ash tried to sit. Tamsin put him back down with her boot. He grinned up at her. You could have been a preacher, he said. I am, she said. My sermons have short altars. The fourth hit tore the latch plate. The fifth would open it. Kells knew it. Tamsin knew it. Jericho knew it and stepped 2 inches farther left into the hole the door would make when it came. On 5, Kells said. 1, 2. Vale, Tamsin said calmly. If I die today, don't let him write my story. 3, Kells said. I won't, he said to her, also calm. If I die today, don't let him measure me. 4, Kells said. Agreed, she said. 5, Kells said, and the door exploded inward on its own surprise. Men came with it, the kind who like to believe doors do favors. The first met Jericho's muzzle like a kiss and forgot his words. The second tripped on the first certainty and went down. The third got through, and Tamsin's gun put him back out again by the simplest path. They kept coming. Kells did not risk himself. Of course he didn't. He offered other men's ribs to the day like a caterer offering cake. Ash, flat on his back, started laughing again and couldn't stop. Blood slicked his teeth. This is so pretty, he said. This is the best song. Shut up, Tamsin said, and shot a fourth man's boot heel clean off his boot without taking the boot. He screamed and fled in a desperate circle like a chicken learning counting. Enough, Kells said outside, not angry, only changing music. Sheriff Wilder, Jericho Vale, I will make you an offer proportional to your talents. His voice warmed, as if laying velvet over something sharp. You give me the boy who thinks he's a briar. You give me the myth that blooms at dusk. I give you the rest of your lives in a world that will know you as wise instead of brave. Tamsin breathed. Ezra's rifle cracked again, then was still. The street listened. Ash, she said without looking down. Yes, preacher, he whispered, wild with it. You want to live to be old enough to be ashamed. He blinked. Maybe? Then stop smiling, she said, and do exactly what I say. She raised her voice enough for Kells to hear. You want the boy? She called. You get him the way men used to get things worth having, with work. Kells laughed. Then let us work. His voice went softer. Vale, you don't owe her anything. Walk away, and I will let you keep your legend polished. Jericho looked at Tamsin. For the first time since he stepped off his horse, his gaze had a question in it that reached below the skin. You want me gone? She surprised herself by not needing to think. No, she said simply, I like where you stand. He nodded. Something like weather shifted behind his eyes, a small front passing. Then I stay. Very well, Kells said, not displeased. We turn the page then. His voice sharpened, and the street hardened with it. Bring the cart. The heavy sound that Ezra had heard became intention. Wheels. A box with iron corners rolled into view. Polished, black, pretty the way graves are pretty when someone rich pays for them. 2 men cranked its handle, and something inside hummed, a thick sound, like bees under a coffin lid. Don't like that, Jericho said. Me neither, Tamsin said.
Kells made it pleasant. A rotary. She chews. She does not explode. Very modern. Very clean. We will collect our reputation without dust. Get down, Tamsin said to the clerk, who had already become floor. Ezra shouted, "Down!" at the street, and the street obeyed the old man who had shod their horses and their father's horses. The box spun. The humming grew a burr, the bank's doorway filled with the opposite of air. Tamsin grabbed Ash Breyer by the collar and rolled him under the desk with her own back to the room. Jericho took the doorframe upright and sideways, a man turning bones into angles. The rotary stitched the doorway with holes, small and many and angry. Wood became memory, and dust became a fog made of splinters.
Kells sighed, as if delighted by efficiency. "Now we are communicating," he said gently. The box rattled down to a stop. Inside the bank, silence fell like a dropped coat. Tamsin tasted wood and iron and herself. Jericho coughed once, and the sound was mostly sawdust. "You alive?" she asked the desk. Ash laughed weakly. "I love your sermons." "Clerk!" A hand shook in the air like a prairie hen peeping over grass. "Here." "Stay there," she said. "They'll?" "Still standing," he said mildly. "He wasted half a box on the door jamb because he liked the sound." "Good." She swallowed the sting in her throat. "I'm going to make him aim lower." "How?" She didn't answer. She stood up into the doorway with the Colt held low and the quiet so thick around her it made a room. She stepped out onto the boards where Kells could see her shape. She thought about what letters she might write if she didn't make it and decided Ezra could spell them for her. "Kells," she called. "You want flowers? I'll bring them to you, but you don't aim at my door again." "Come into the street then," he said warmly. "Let us exchange bouquets." "Tamsin," Jericho said from inside the bank, not an order, a question. "I'm going to speak for my town. Cover the clerk. Keep Ash Breyer from doing something handsome." Jericho let out the breath that keeps a name from catching in the chest. "All right," he said. Tamsin stepped into the white heat. The Rotary's men stepped back on instinct. Men holding new machines are always surprised when a person chooses to be closer. Kells sat his black horse as if it were an armchair at a very fine party. He was handsome in a way that depended on polish and attention. He smiled at her. "Sheriff Wilder," he said, admiring. "You are a better story than the one I brought. Then take the lesser one and leave. Collect Ash Breyer's grin and leave the rest." He clucked his tongue. "I do not collect boys. I collect signatures. The Larkspur ghost has been overdue to sign herself to the page." Tamsin's jaw set. "Then you're illiterate." He smiled wider, pleased with her. "My dear, I read better than any man you know. I read fear. I read intent. I read the place where your bullet will go before you pull it. Read this," she said, and pointed to the ground 2 feet in front of the Rotary. "If your boy pulls that lever again in my direction, Jericho Vale will close your eyes for you, and I will empty what's left of you into a story you don't get to own." Kells' eyebrows rose, delighted. "Vale?" "Here," Jericho said from the dimness, calm as a church in snow. Kells' smile got small and true. "Oh, I believe it," he said, "but the thing about fear is, mine has a longer stride than yours." He lifted a finger, and the Rotary's men put hands to the crank. Tamsin saw Ash move behind her in the reflection of a window. The boy was trying to stand up to make a joke to a fate that wouldn't laugh. She didn't turn. She did the only arithmetic that mattered, weight and angle, and what a board will take when asked to be more than a board. She shot the anvil. Sound went strange. You don't shoot iron, but you can make noise into a shape. The anvil sang like a struck bell, and the note bucked the Rotary's boy's wrists through the wood of the porch. The crank jerked. The machine choked. It tried to bite the same place twice and bit its own tongue instead. The belt slipped. A pin skittered. The hum failed. Jericho shot the pin while it was in the air because of course he did. It shattered with a little cry, and the Rotary sagged into sulk and uselessness. Kells smiled, brighter. "Oh, very good," he said. "Very, very good. New page."
He lifted 2 fingers and his men fanned out. "Back in," Jericho shouted sharply. Tamsin didn't move. She cut the street in half with where she put her feet and turned Ash Breyer's story into a choice while his mouth was still trying to build a grin. "Ash," she said, without looking back, "this is the last time today I get to ask you to help yourself. You can be a boy someone uses, or you can stand up, walk out, and put your hands behind your head and say you surrender to the quiet."
Silence held its breath like a small animal waiting to see how the hawk would lean. Ash made a sound she had not heard from him all day. It was smaller than a laugh and bigger than a word. He stood up. He walked past her. He turned to the street and lifted his ruined hands to the sky. "I surrender," he said, voice breaking, "to the quiet." Kell's face did not change. Men like him never let their faces tell the truth. But something in the set of his shoulders tightened, a ledger entry going from black to red. "You disappoint me," he said almost tenderly. Ash smiled, and for the first time it looked human. He said, "That's new for me." Kells tipped his head. "Shoot him." Jericho moved first. Tamsin moved at the same time. Ezra shouted. Milo screamed a warning that didn't have words in it. The Rotary boys reached for a crank that wasn't there. The balcony men put rifles to their cheeks. The hotel's upstairs curtains sighed as if someone had leaned out to pray. "Don't you—" Tamsin began, but the order dissolved into the white flare of a muzzle on the balcony and the black bite of a bullet aimed at the boy who had just decided to change. She could reach with her body or with her gun. She chose the only reach that would matter in the time the world gave her. Tamsin stepped between Ash and the bullet. And the world narrowed to the size of a coin, and the coin spun, and all the light in dry water gathered on its edge. The bullet came like a small god. Something else came faster. A palm, not hers. Jericho Vale's hand hit her shoulder and spun her 3 inches left, exactly the width of a lie. The bullet tore her sleeve and kissed the skin under it with a heat that would become a bruise with her name. It took a piece of air that belonged to her and gave it to the street. Ash cried out and dropped to his knees. "I surrender," he shouted at the sky as if the sky wrote ledgers. "I surrender." Kell smiled, meaning it for no one and for everyone. Ink dries, stories fix. He lifted 2 fingers again, lazy as wealth. "Vale," Tamsin said, and for the first time the quiet in her voice held grief like a small bird she did not want to crush. "Don't let him right us." Jericho's gun turned, and the street learned something about fear that it would remember. Levy Kell's eyes widened and he saw his own name without its shine for a heartbeat. He squeezed his knees against his horse, and the horse did not move because Ezra had looped its rein around the hitch with a knot he had taught to hold until a prayer let go. Another muzzle flash bloomed from the balcony. Tamsin took Ash by the back of the shirt and pulled him toward the office door with a violence that felt like mercy. She didn't know if Jericho had already shot Kells or the rope or the sky. She didn't know because the second balcony shot found something it wanted. The glass above the bank manager's desk shattered inward. A shard the size of a man's palm fell like a piece of winter and sliced the map on the office wall from top to bottom. The wind came in wearing July, and the room's air changed into something that smelled like the day a town chooses whether it lives. "Down!" Ezra roared. "Down!" Milo echoed, voice breaking. "Down," Tamsin said, and the word slipped on blood and became something else in her mouth. She felt her knee hit wood. She felt Ash's ribs under her palm. She felt the whole building decide to flex and hold. And then a third voice, A voice that had not spoken since the day began filled the street. Not Jericho's, not Kell's, not a boy's. A woman in the boarding house window had leaned on the sill with a shotgun older than her and steadier. Letha Joe. Her hair was down. Her eyes were something you could build a fence out of. "Leave my sheriff alone," she said, and the boarding house eaves carried it like scripture. Two men on the balcony flinched at the sound of a woman treating them like chores. One of them forgot which hand was his. The other laughed at her. Letha Joe shot the laugh out of his mouth. Silence hit the street like rain. Kells drew breath to make a different kind of order. Jericho shifted the weight of a man deciding which bone to break to change a day. Ash spoke a small prayer to any god that still listened to boys. Tamsin rose through pain and heat and splinters and made a shape out of her back that the town could stand behind. And at that exact hinge of silence, with the boardwalk hot under her boots and a death trying to embroider itself into her sleeve, the good undertaker lowered his two fingers and began to say a new word. And a second black horse came in at a dead run from the north, iron blowing, foam on bit, its rider low and forward, the animal's neck a line a painter would give up on. The rider didn't yell, the rider didn't raise a gun, the rider rode at Levy Kells the way a promise rides at a lie. Jericho Vale's eyes changed color in the instant before the collision. Levy Kells' horse remembered it was a creature and tried to be elsewhere. Tamsin saw what was going to happen, and there was nothing to do but watch it. The second horse brushed Kells' stirrup, and the world made a noise like a church bell breaking. Levy Kells fell. The man in the black coat, hat brim down, jaw set, hands on the reins as if they were truth, hauled his mount sideways hard enough to leave hoofprints in the boards and came up facing Kells on the ground. The new rider's face blew clear of dust long enough for the town to know it, and everything in Drywater Crossing that could turn cold did. Because the new rider was not a new rider at all. It was the man the Larkspur ghost had made a vow never to stand with again. It was the only person in the West who could make Jericho Vale's mouth close on a word he had planned to say. It was the preacher's son with the graveyard eyes and the draw that came from the wrist instead of the shoulder.
It was the old name that had followed Tamsin across 3 territories and into the quiet. Calder North. Ash Breyer whispered it like a child trying a curse. Calder. Jericho Vale's gun moved a half-inch. His jaw moved a half-inch more. "Wilder," he said, very soft. "You didn't tell me you kept that ghost under your floorboards?" "I didn't," Tamsin said, and her voice did something it hadn't done since she was 17. It trembled. "He keeps himself." Calder North smiled at Levi Kells with a tenderness that felt like a lie trying on church clothes. "Morning, Undertaker," he said. "I hear you were writing my friend's story for her." He lifted his gun just enough to see if the light liked it. Kells, on his back, dust on his teeth, eyes furious and bright, smiled up at him and said through the prettiest rage Tamsin had ever heard, "Boys!" And the street fired. The sound that followed was not gunfire. It was the cliff giving way under a river that has argued too long. And as wood and glass and iron turned to wind, as Jericho Vale chose where to put his body, and Ezra Tompkins chose where to put his last good bullet, and Letha Joe chose where to aim her second barrel, Tamsin understood exactly how many ways a town can break in one heartbeat. She also understood that there was no version of this hour that didn't end with her on the boards between Levi Kells and the men who thought they could make her into a page in their ledger. She stepped. She raised the Colt. She found the part of her hand that remembered the way a petal falls. And as the air turned to steel around her,
As Calder North and Jericho Vale carved the street into angles, and Kells's men learned the meaning of the word retreat from their own blood, Tamsin saw something too late. A small, careful sparkle where there hadn't been one before. A fuse, rebitten, hiding under the broken bank door. Tamsin inhaled to shout. The spark licked the fuse. The hello became a goodbye. And the bank began to lift. Floorboards heaved as if the building had decided to be a great animal shrugging off flies. Air turned white and grainy. The door frame tried to become a wheel. Tamsin's teeth slammed together. The shock ran up through her boots and into the soft places behind her eyes. For a heartbeat, the world forgot gravity, then remembered it with a crash like ironware dropped from a second floor. She threw her body over the clerk and yanked Ash Breyer tight into the cave of the desk as plaster burst into gray confetti. The map on the wall ripped along a meridian. Coins leapt and rang like panicked birds. Jericho Vale rode the doorway down, hands on the jamb, knees bent, weight turning into angles that did not break. Splinters patted his hat and kept going, embarrassed to have touched him. When the noise fell from roar to howl, when the howl fell to a ringing like a kettle left too long to boil, Tamsin lifted her head. Dust made noon thicker. The bank breathed like a bruised chest. "You with me?" she said, voice hoarse, to the clerk. "Yes," he croaked. "I think so. Am I bleeding?" "Yes," she said, "but you'll keep it." "Ash?" A laugh answered, small now, shaken loose from the swagger. "Preacher? I think I like living." "Good," she said. "Act like it." Outside the bank, the street had become three kinds of sound. A high, thin keening from the tortured hinges, the harried stomp of horses trying to remember which way was down, and men speaking too loudly to pretend they were not afraid. Over all of it, a woman's voice, Letha Joe, shouting, "Bucket, bucket, bucket," like scripture. Tamsin stood. Her legs tried to misremember what standing was. She corrected them. Jericho's shadow moved across her like cooler weather. He had not fired. He had simply watched the way violence rearranged the room and chosen where to be of use. "Undertaker?" she asked. Jericho looked past her into the day. "Didn't get him. He rolled mean and lucky." "Course he did. He's built from varnish and habit." She put her shoulder to the broken door and shouldered it wider. Heat slapped. Drywater Crossing lay under a new constellation of dust and glitter. The rotary had died a petty death, belt off, pin gone, crank sulking at a bad angle. The black cart Kells had brought was still pretty. Pretty as patient. Kells himself was not in sight. Men scattered where he had been. Some on their knees, some flat, some walking backward like boys climbing out of lies. Ash's remaining gang looked smaller the moment they had to decide their own heights. The balcony riflemen had taken their lesson from Letha Joe's second barrel and became ghosts. Town first, then the men who thought they owned it. Jericho agreed as if he cited a book he liked. "I'll keep the door from being a mouth."
Jericho nodded as if she had quoted a book he liked. "I'll keep the door from being a mouth." She stepped into the street, Colt low, eyes high. Ezra staggered past with a bucket. His beard was full of plaster grit, and his eyes were pure anvil. "Well?" he rasped. "Not done," Tamsin said, "but not theirs." "Good enough," he said, and hustled for the water trough, where Milo and two other boys were making a clumsy line that looked like a prayer taught at speed. Tamsin read the town in a blink. 2 fires, both small. One where the rotary's chewing had angered the bank's step and lit bark dust. One in a trash barrel overthrown by fear. Men stamped at those flames with hats and curses. A horse had cut its leg on a board and was trying hard not to remember it belonged to panic. The livery boy crooned to it like a mother. Letha Jo darted from doorway to doorway, gathering people with her hands and her voice, a willow made of wire. And beyond the ordinary, beyond the fixable, movement at the far end of the street, Levi Kells on his feet again, dust turned to a kind of polish on his coat, hat restored to its meaning by a touch. He walked as men walk when they have not yet admitted to themselves that they fell. 2 of his men flanked him. They were good at flanking. Men who work for undertakers learn how to stand near death without touching it. Tamsin's chest tightened at an old angle. Another shape leaned in the street, loose in the saddle, Calder North. His eyes, unreadable at distance, were fixed on Kells the way a cat fixes on an idea. Jericho Vale stepped from the bank half a pace behind Tamsin and found a place in the geometry where his stillness turned into warning. Kells saw the 3 of them together and smiled like a gambler seeing 3 of a kind face up. "Sheriff," he called conversationally, voice carrying as if the dust were a parlor. "Mr. Vale, Mr. North, find company. Shall we resume where architecture interrupted us?" He dusted his sleeve with 2 fingers, a dainty gesture that begged to be shot. "Resume with your hands where I can count them," Tamsin said, moving to put herself a half step ahead of both gunslingers without appearing to, so the town would understand where to place its courage. Kells lifted his hands obediently, palms soft and clean. "I have made a study of days like this. They are hammer and chisel for reputations. But I'm a craftsman. I don't tire easily. Give me back my boy and your flower, and we'll call it even. The boy belongs to himself. The flower doesn't grow for men like you." Kells's eyes warmed as if at a compliment. "You speak well, Sheriff Wilder, but speech is free. Men will pay more for a funeral." He tipped his chin. "Shoot the blacksmith." The order came out like a cough. The man to Kell's right lifted his rifle without thinking about Ezra's history, how many shoes he'd nailed for free, how many foals he'd pulled from mares in the dark. The rifle barked. The shot went low. Ezra grunted and went to a knee. His bucket spilled silver arcs. "Enough," Tamsin said, and shot the rifle from the flanker's hands. The man yelped and clutched a new hole in the air where his bravery had been. Jericho's gun did not move. It existed in the world with a grace that made other guns reconsider their career choices. Calder North twirled his with the idleness of a snake letting its tongue taste for decisions. The 3 of them made a strange altar for the town to look at. Law, quiet death, and the kind of danger that smells like church fire. "Wilder," Calder said, without looking at her, "want him alive?" "Yes. If the world gets another day, it needs to learn from him." "Learning, that's a way to say hurt later." 3 live men, Jericho said mildly, are harder to bury than 1 dead one. Kells laughed, delighted to be the subject of grammar. "I adore this, I really do." He snapped his fingers. "Second line." Men moved in the windows like shadows, remembering they had bodies. 2 muzzles appeared in the high gloom of the hotel hallway, one at the barber's door, one in the alley where the livery's back gate lived. Kells's people were tidy. He had packed them like satin around a very expensive box. Tamsin felt the street's math change and knew 3 things at once. Letha Jo had 1 barrel left and a cousin of anger enough for 2. Ezra would stand again and make every bullet he had left honorable, and if she tried to kill Kells now, his men would salt the town with grief to pay for it. "Hold," she said, to the town, to Calder's appetite, to the part of Jericho that did not need words. She let the day hear the decisions she did not say out loud. "Kells, I'm going to ask you for something you've never given anyone. Attention." He tipped his head, amused. "That I can spare." "Good. This is the last bargain you get with me. You leave without a corpse. You take your men who can walk. You leave your weapons. You do it now. If you do, you get to talk about Drywater Crossing in saloons without showing scars. If you don't, you leave in pieces too small for a story to hold." Kells made a humming noise of a man admiring a handmade chair. "And if I call your bluff?" "I didn't study the word bluff. I studied funerals." She let her voice travel like water into places where fear hid. "Ask around. You'll find I don't prefer them. but I know how to stand between one and a town." The Undertaker's smile didn't move, but something around his eyes did. He was measuring, and not only her. Jericho Vale's patience is a kind of weather. You feel the pressure drop. Calder North's hunger has a sound like a wire being tuned. Kells read those too. He needed to own the hour more than he needed to survive it, and that is how men like him get planted.
"Boys," he said lightly, "collect the quiet." 3 things happened in one breath. The hotel hallway spat fire. Letha Joe, who had been a woman in a window with a family's worth of wrath, turned into a storm and emptied her second barrel down the hallway's throat. Jericho Vale shot the gun out of the barber's hand without altering his heartbeat. Tamsin moved left into Kells's angle and made herself a key in a lock she could feel but not see. She shot Kells through the coat, not to kill, never there, but to take his balance away. The bullet kissed his hip pocket. He staggered with the shock of being told his body had an edge he had not paid for. His gun went wide and back, and the rear sight raked his own knuckles. Blood lent his expensive cuff a lesson about humility. The alleyman shot, wild with it. Ezra's last good bullet, saved for a word he hadn't said yet, punched the alleyman's hat into a sermon about humility and knocked him on his backside into a rain barrel that had not planned to be useful, but became so anyway. The barrel sloshed like laughter. "Drop it," Tamsin said to Kells. He didn't. Pride forbids certain obeyings. He raised the muzzle toward Letha Joe's window instead, toward the woman who had just told a different story than the one he had written for her. Tamsin stepped into that line and shot the hinge off Kells's pistol so the barrel drooped like a wilting flower. He stared at the stupid angle of his weapon and then at her as if she had vandalized a painting. "You collect signatures? Here's mine." She took his attention, made it all hers, and held it while the town did the rest. Letha Joe's cousin flanked from the dress shop and pressed a kitchen shotgun into the barber's ear. Milo, against orders but with a boy's perfect timing, hurled a brick at the hotel hallway's third shadow. Jericho threaded 3 shots through wood and dust that found exactly the men who had decided to shoot at women and then changed their minds for them. Calder stood between Kells and the black cart and dared anyone to cross that space and find out what kind of story it told. Kells's eyes, clever, greedy, always counting, found out he had run out of arithmetic. He smiled anyway. Men like him practiced that most of all. "Sheriff," he said softly, too soft for the watching windows, "you have a problem." "No, I have a job." "You have 2 wolves," he murmured, eyes flicking to the left and right where Jericho Vale and Calder stood at their different distances. "They will not share a meadow for long." "Then they can use different meadows," she said, and kicked his ruined gun across the boards to make a noise that got everyone's attention and took his words away. "Hands, now." Kells raised them slowly and gracefully, a man tipping a hat to his own reflection. He turned his wrists so the light could see they were soft and unscathed. "You don't use iron," he said, smiling true. "It stains. You can have rope. It has a better memory." Ash Briar, dirt on his teeth and something new in his eyes, stumbled up with a length of line he must have snatched from the livery. He looked at Kells, at Tamsin, at Jericho, and managed to tie a knot that would make Ezra proud. His hands shook, for shame, for relief, for adrenaline failing, but the knot was honest. Kells tested it and made a face as if he had eaten a green persimmon. "Boys," he called out, not loudly, more habit than hope. No one answered. Those who could run had run. Those who couldn't were being taught the gospel of sitting by the town's men and women who knew how to teach it. "Levi," Tamsin said softly, "for your ledger, Drywater is a place, not a page." He nodded once, as if taking dictation for a headstone. It made her uneasy how much he liked the line. "Sheriff," Ezra came to her then, hand over his side where the errant bullet had planted a bruised truth. "It's clean," he said when she looked to his wound. "Went through barrel staves first. I'll complain at it later." He jerked his chin at Kells.
You want the jail? Yes. Kid him company. Ash, you're coming too. Ash flinched. You surrendered to the quiet. Now you sit with it. You'll make a statement after you eat bread and water and remember how to speak like a person. He swallowed hard. Yes, Sheriff. The word sheriff put a sweetness in his throat he had not known he could have. Vale, Tamsin said without turning her head. Watch the windows until the jail latch says home. I can do that. Calder, and it cost her something to say his name with the town listening. If you plan to make a mess, make it under another sky. He swung down from his horse in a single lazy line and stood close enough that the chilled part of her blood remembered how thin the world once was. The fine white scar at his jaw that she used to touch with a thumb when she was foolish looked newer in the dust. You're welcome, he murmured. Don't write your own sermon in my town, not over mine. His smile was tired around the edges. This isn't your town, Tamsin. It's a day with your name on it. He flicked a glance at Jericho Vale, then back. Who gets your dawn tomorrow? The people who haul the buckets, and the woman with the window gun, and the old man who knots a horse he doesn't like, folks who pay attention. That's who gets my dawn. Something in Calder's mouth softened. It didn't last. He leaned in just enough for the day to shrink around the space between his words and her ear. I heard you were a ghost, but you're a herb. You flavored the whole street. Flavor washes off. Leave before you mistake it for a meal. He tilted his hat and stepped away. For now. Tamsin looked at Jericho then. His eyes were calm in a way that had nothing to do with habit and everything to do with choice. You staying? She asked. Long enough to see if the undertaker keeps his manners. Then I'll be where the next bad arithmetic is. Try teaching instead of totaling.
He smiled a small smile that didn't mind being small. I am today. They got Kells to the jail. Ezra walked with the rope in his big, scarred hand. Ash walked ahead, very street, practicing the new thing his spine had learned. Milo trotted a half-step behind with a bucket, as if he were the custodian of water now. The clerk from the bank came stumbling and weeping after them, grateful to have a job, any job, and found one carrying the keys. Inside, the cells smelled like iron and old rain. Tamsin opened the second door with a key that stuck because keys do when the day has been hot. In, she said. Kells bowed like a man entering a ballroom and sat on the cot as if it were a chaise. Ash took the neighboring cell without invitation and without excuse. He sat and stared at his hands like they were new acquaintances he meant to treat better. I'd offer you coffee, Tamsin told Kells, but you don't need the sugar. I run on narrative, he said cheerfully, but I won't say no to a cup later. He laid his bound hands in his lap and smiled up at her with a courtesy that made her teeth itch. My compliments, Sheriff. You end beautifully. I'm not finished, she said, and the quiet put its hand back on her shoulder, claiming her like an old friend. She left Ezra to mind the jail and crossed the street. The afternoon had found itself again. The fires were out. Letha Jo had her hair back up. The dressmaker was sweeping glass with a dignity that dared anyone to pity her. The hotel keeper wept openly while counting buckshot holes in his hallway, as honest a ledger as any man kept. The rotary lay like a sulking animal whose teeth had been taken. Tamsin picked up Ash's cap from where the rope had stripped it and beat dust from it with laconic affection. She handed it to Milo. Hang that up, right side of the peg. He did, and looked taller for it. She went to Ezra and touched his side with careful fingers. He winced, breathed, nodded. Hurts like wrong grammar, but I'll live to correct it. Good, she said. I need you to shoe this town's fear with something that doesn't slip. He clapped her shoulder and hissed when his side reminded him not to. You did us proud today. I did us necessary, she said. Jericho stood in the bank's shadow with his hat brim low.
a piece of daylight caught neatly along the edge. The undertaker's men are learning how to look like customers. No one's aiming for now. We'll keep it that way, she said. You thirsty? Always, he said without humor. She went into her office and poured coffee that had no right to taste as good as it did after this kind of day. She added a drip of water to the pot because soldiers taught her how to pull one more cup from what looks like the end. She brought 2 tin mugs back out, handed one to Jericho, kept one for herself, breathed the bitter steam like someone learning to live again. Wilder, you want me to ride with him a while? He didn't say Calder's name. He didn't need to. Names are heavier when you don't drop them. No, she said, surprising herself and not regretting it. If he wants to be useful, he knows the shape. If he wants to be himself, he'll do that under a different sky. She sipped. Taxi. You ever get tired of being the lesson men teach themselves? Often, he said without humor, but it keeps me from working in a bank. They stood with the kind of ease that comes only after too much speed. The town settled the way powder settles after pouring, level, quiet, a service done. Toward evening, a wire got through from Blue Mesa by virtue of a rider who had more horse than good sense. It asked for a report and promised deputies at dawn. Tamsin sent back, return at noon, bank intact, prisoners held, town standing. She added 2 extra words she allowed herself rarely. Send thanks. Before sunset, she went to the jail alone. It was a habit to inspect her own decisions before the dark got a turn at them. Kells stood at the bars, hands around iron as if it were a prop in a play. Sheriff, he said warmly, have you considered how many saloons will buy me drinks to hear about you? I have. I've also considered how many will stop listening when they hear you lost. He chuckled. You think in prose, you should think in chorus. They'll sing about the Larkspur ghost, I'll see to it. You won't like my verses. I'm not a ghost, I'm a sheriff. People who can tell the difference get to live here. He leaned in. The lantern light put gold in his eyes. You can't keep both wolves. One eats the other while you sleep.
Neither of them live in my bed, she said. If either comes to my door, he wipes his boots. He laughed, delighted. Do you ever tire of winning conversations? Often, she said. It keeps me from turning into you. She turned to Ash. He sat on his cot with a Bible on his knees he hadn't opened. He stood when she looked his way, then remembered to sit, because bars make standing look like begging. You're going to speak tomorrow, she said. I will, he said. His voice had an unvarnished shape. You're going to name who sent the wire to Kells. You're going to name the men who hired you to soften the town before the strongbox came through. You're going to say you're sorry to Milo. You're going to work Ezra's forge 3 months or until he says you stop. You're going to carry water for Letha Jo until she tells you to speak. You're going to sit in church if her mama tells you to. Then you're going to leave or stay as a person instead of a plague. Ash swallowed. And if I can't? Then you try again and make failing your apprenticeship instead of your identity, she said. Or you ride and don't call it exile. You call it learning. He blinked hard. Sheriff? What? Thank you for pulling me into the quiet. You pulled yourself, she said. I only made room. She slept that night in the office cot with her boots on and her hat over her eyes and the Colt on the desk within the reach of her arm if it remembered her name. She woke twice to quiet checks. Jericho's shadow at the window once. Calder's silhouette across the street once. The 2 men's movements different songs. She didn't rise for either. She had already told each what needed saying. At dawn, the town was a skinned knee that had decided to be a scar in a way that made it a story, not a wound. The deputies rolled in close to noon with dust on their hats and good intentions slung over their saddles. They took Kells from her hand with the respect you give a woman who has done your day for you. They took statements, and Ezra cussed through his pain in a way that made the young deputy write faster just to keep up. Letha Jo signed her name with a flourish that made the deputy smile against his sense of decorum. Milo held his cap straight as a line for every word, like his head was a table the truth could sit on. Kells asked for a comb. Tamsin gave him one and watched him make his hair into a promise. "You'll see me again," he said mildly as they strapped him to his saddle. "Bring a hat that fits your head," she said. Jericho Vale took off his hat to her. Not a flourish, a plain human gesture. "You don't need me now," he said. "I do," and then let him see she meant it in a way that didn't bind him. "Not here, but somewhere I don't know yet." "I'll be there," he said. Calder North had no farewells. He sat his horse under the sun with a patience that used to be a threat, and now only looked like age catching up to a man. "You gonna make me a lawman?" he called, a grin in it, half dare, half ache. "No," she said. "I'm going to make you someone else's problem." He laughed once and tipped his brim. "Someday you'll ask." "Someday I won't," she said. "Ride with a second canteen. You forget to be human when you're thirsty." He touched his hat for that and went north with the sun ahead of him, a long, deliberate shadow in the heat shimmer. At sundown, Tamsin swept her office because that is what you do when a day has tried to make you big. You do a small thing right. She set the star on the desk, polished it with the corner of a rag, and pinned it back to her shirt where it wanted to be. She hung the spare holster behind the door. She fed the office cat, who had not featured in the day's events and was offended by that. She walked the length of Drywater Crossing as people put their world back in order. Nails, brooms, cloth over broken glass, the first quiet jokes snapping like kindling catching. She let them say sheriff to her in the new way the word had acquired, and she said their names back so the town would remember how they sounded.
Under the first stars, she stood where the street begins and ends and watched the dark put the day away. Ezra came and stood with her, silent. Letha Jo came and stood on her other side, a line of three with the town behind them like a choir. "You gonna keep the extra bristle?" Ezra asked, nodding at the hidden seam in her belt where the derringer had slept for years. "Yes," she said, "but I'm going to use it to sew." Letha Jo laughed softly. "I like it when you talk pretty." "Tomorrow I'll talk schedules, bank hours, patrols, pay." "Pretty can't afford tomorrow," Ezra said, which was the best compliment he knew how to give. Milo wandered up with a broom twice his height and an air of importance exactly the right size for him. "You need me to lock the telegraph?" he asked. "Yes," she said gravely, "and put your cap on the left peg. It's a new rule." "Yes, Sheriff," he said, but the gravity of a holy day. They stood until the town's lamps made islands. They stood until the heat went up and let the ground breathe. They stood until the sound of hooves far away so the deputies had crested the ridge with the undertaker's coach and were gone from Drywater long enough for the town to remember itself. Tamsin breathed and let the quiet settle again where it belonged. It did not feel like hiding anymore. It felt like a tool put back on its hook,